Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to Intune Tech Community Live. We're kicking off 3 hours of asking Microsoft anything about Intune today. Very exciting day. Visit aka.ms/tcl Intune for all the full agenda. To introduce myself, I'm your new host, first time hosting this event. My name is Cheris Bobkov. I work for Intune marketing team focused on customer adoption. I really love the topic of cloud native, and today I can't wait to bring all the three other guests here to talk with you on-prem to cloud native, your Intune setup. I will start to hand over the mic to every other folks in this chat, including Priya, Joe, and Danny, and they will spend some time to introduce themselves and their focus areas. Over to you, Priya.
Thank you, Charles. Hi, everybody. My name is Priya Ravichandran. I'm a product management lead in Intune. I focus on mobile management, specifically Android, as well as the frontline worker scenarios, and work with the teams to do settings deployment. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. Go ahead, Joe.
Thanks, Priya. Thanks, Charis. So nice to see you all. My name is Joe Lurie. I am a PM product manager on the customer experience engineering team. We called it the CXE CAT team. I work with customers every day. If you've seen me on LinkedIn, one thing I said recently is I bleed Windows blood. So cloud native is near and dear to my heart, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions. Danny?
Yep, Danny Guillory, PM on Intune. I'm responsible for a lot of configuration manager and many other things within Intune app space.
All right, let's jump right in. Thank you for the intro. First thing first, there's the most common question we get again and again from Microsoft and all the other forums. The question is, do we really need hybrid? Or can we just go straight to the cloud?
That's like let me just lob that first softball question at you. But I'm actually a little confused because do we need hybrid? Without hybrid, that means you're going from configuration manager and Active Directory group policy, no Entra, no Azure, directly to Intune and Azure without anything in between. So do you need hybrid? No, but it's the best way to get started, I would say, because before you turn everything off and reset all your devices, because it would require a wipe and a reload and bring them all into cloud native. It's nice to get them into configuration manager get them from configuration manager into through co-management or even just into Intune, but get your compliance policies working the way they need to work. Get your conditional access policies working the way they need to work before resetting all devices and moving directly into Intune and Entra. So the question is, do you need hybrid? No, but it is a good first step. Danny, I'll let you add on to that.
Feels like a philosophical argument every time I hear this question. I'm going to play devil's advocate. Need, I think, is a strong word.
That was my point. Need is a strong word, but go ahead.
Want, I think, is the appropriate word. I would say for your existing devices, yeah, go ahead, stay hybrid. But, if you're getting a pallet of devices, again, I'm putting myself back as IT director again, ordering devices from Dell, Lenovo, HP, whatever vendor of choice, right? If you're getting 30, 40 laptops or mobile devices or just devices, they should be cloud only. I've had this conversation way too many times since being in engineering. You should definitely be cloud only, enroll those devices in the cloud only, because the problem is when you go hybrid, you knee jerk to what's natural, what works. So you should go through some of the pain, right? Get 10 devices cloud only. Note all the things that don't work or you're having trouble with or frustration with. And those are real issues. And then you can peel that back even more to say, are they really business critical issues? Are they just quality of life issues, right? Those are different buckets. Those have different solutions. Those have different prioritizations, right? So you should, I'm going to, play devil's advocate, go cloud native with those new devices. If you just have to do hybrid for existing devices, go for it. But new devices should be cloud native, period.
That's a good clarification. So thank you. Existing devices, again, they requires a wipe and reload. It's nice to do that hybrid first, but all your new devices, autopilot, enter joined for sure.
Yeah, let me add
And by
on.
new device, I'm talking about newly procured, any repurposed devices. If you have to reset a device because you spent 20 minutes on a help desk ticket and you're about to reset it anyway, again, all those devices right up to enter joined, not a problem.
Yeah, let me add on that. One of the reasons one of the reasons I'm telling you and requesting that you do that, recommending, is the fact that if you, let's just say, for example, you order a pallet of devices and you hybrid join them. There's no way to go to cloud native without a wipe and reload, right? So, or replace or autopilot refresh or something like that. So you're just adding to the debt you're going to have to pay later. So work through those problems. I would honestly say, I said this before, and I feel like 2 years ago, if you're not doing it now, you're definitely behind the power curve. Like before, I said that in a nice way. Now I would say I'm saying it nicer, but a lot stronger. Like if you're not doing that already, you're so far behind the power curve. It is going to hurt.
Yeah, I just double down on that. I've interviewed a lot of customers throughout time, and I definitely see when customers start with a new device, trying a POC to test it out, the enter join, autopilot, auto patch into managed environment, they feel like this is exactly what they need, and they build confidence about rolling out broadly. So I definitely encourage everybody to go for this route just to test it out. Okay, I'll move on to the question two. It's this question from tech community, and I love how he framed this. This person framed the question, coming from a co-managed environment. We're close to delivering device cloud native with autopilot, Entra Join, and Intune. We have also moved all the configure manager workloads to Intune. We're finally ready to decommission our config man infrastructure. So, what are the steps to take and in order to phase out the config manager infrastructure? Exciting, right?
Yep, Danny, I'll throw that one right over to you.
Joe, you should chime in first. You
All
don't
right,
want
so
to
I will. Yeah, I can chime in first. I'm going to say you've moved all the workloads over to Intune. I just confirm all the workloads, even the ones that don't have the sliders, things like BitLocker management, for example. The first thing I would do if you're managing BitLocker to Configuration Manager, I would make sure all those keys are being escrowed into Azure. That's got to be your first step. After that, it's fairly as easy as removing the Configuration Manager agent and making sure group policy doesn't put it back. It's really to make sure my device is no longer on Configuration Manager, remove the agent. And so once you confirm that all the workloads are coming from Intune, once you confirm that those BitLocker keys are escrowed into Azure AD or Entra ID, then you can remove the Configuration Manager agent from those devices. As Danny was saying in the last question, don't send that, remove Configuration Manager agent script to 20,000 devices on Monday morning. I would start slow do it in rings. But really, once you've confirmed everything's working properly in Intune, then you can start moving at a quicker pace. Danny?
Yeah. Like my process that I've told customers before is once you've got all those workloads moved, I would shut off ConfigMan for the day, set it off for a week. Like what you don't want to do is wind up into a problem, right? Everybody thinks they've dotted every I, crossed every T, but what's a process like prescription? If I was a customer again, once all the workloads are moved, confirmed all the workloads are moved, then SCCM turns off. That's it, server, virtual, physical, whatever. That server's turned off for the week. Server's turned off probably for the month, because I need to know what's going to break. What do I rely on? What do I rely on? What does my team rely on? Then the critical pieces, what does a business rely on? Because the things I want is going to be different than the business. The things I need is for me to manage my operations, manage my operational workflow, manage my team. But those things may not be cohesive or connect with the business needs, right? Again, as I talked about before, there's different priorities for different things. So turn the config man off, turn it off for a week, and then now you really am running cloud only. Now anything that pops up, You need to prioritize it or put it in an appropriate bucket. Is it a quality of life thing? Is it an operations thing? And is it critical to the business? Critical to the business, that's your P0. You need to go fix that. You need a solution. You need a workaround. You need something for it. And you probably can find it because this has come up so many times. It's insane. But you can probably find it, but it does take work. I do know that everybody's time is precious. Sometimes time and the level of effort of investigation, implementation, execution are not aligned. So you need jerk to just turn the thing back on, but you can do that because you didn't remove it. So now you have a fallback plan. And then while your fallback plan is still working, you can put a time frame around it. It's not just, oh, we turned it on because this didn't work. No, you turned it on for X amount of time until you have a solution. So you put a process around that. So now once you have all the I's dotted, T's crossed, because you've turned config man off, you understand what your gaps are, you found solutions for it. Then now you can say, start removing the agent. That's it. That's all I got for you, though. I can chime in more. Priya, you've been pretty quiet. You got any comments, thoughts?
No, I mean, I think from my perspective, making a plan to get to cloud native will then get you to a single management tool for all your devices, Windows and mobile, because mobile always starts cloud native. There is really no on-prem option. So if you've got a hybrid environment, kind of planning to get to cloud native also streamlines the operational aspects and gets you a single pane of glass for your entire device estate. So I think the hows and the whys, Joe and Danny, you guys are the SMEs, but the mobile piece will get you the complement to now not have to jump between tooling to get a full management experience.
Well said. Thank you for that, Pierre. Let's move on to the next question. This is also a question from tech community. It says, it's been a while since we reviewed a move from hybrid to pure cloud. Are there still any blockers? For example, GPO preference, or have they all been overcome right now?
It's
Any comments?
Yeah, it's a because of the way it's worded, I'll answer it the way it's worded. A GPO preference blocker for you might not be a blocker for everybody. One of the biggest preferences that we see is like map drives as an example, and we don't really need map drives in a cloud managed world. So our customers might think that they need map drives, or they need to create a registry key through group policy preference or whatever that preference is that you're using. That might still be a blocker for you, but not for all of your devices, and it might not be a blocker for someone else. So I'm going to say there 100% of the group policy objects settings are not in Intune. Many of those settings are irrelevant for a cloud native device. Many of the settings are irrelevant for Windows 11 device. They might have been added to GPOs back in Windows Vista Glass, I forget what we called the glass, Aero Glass days, right? You wanted to turn off active desktop, and so we set a group policy to turn off active desktop, but there isn't active desktop in Windows 11, so that group policy is irrelevant. Or some of the policies that we set other ways, you're setting it through a firewall policy, you're setting it through edge management, you're setting it through Entra, maybe it's a password policy. So those policies aren't in GPO anymore. They're somewhere else in the cloud native world. So to answer your question, are there any blockers? Possibly, but those blockers will be unique to you and your company. And that's why we stress that you need to start with a few devices. Start with your new devices. Start with those devices that you know can go right to cloud native, and start working on those blockers that you have. But the key, and I think Priya started saying this earlier, the key is to get started, to start with those few devices first. Because if you never start, you'll never get through into the process. Danny?
Yeah, 100%. Like starting, you got to start somewhere. Like not starting because you're too busy or overanalyzed. Like that's not an excuse. Like again, I'm being a lot more firm nowadays. Like again, if you haven't started this, you're behind. Like because now when we were telling people to do this before, AI wasn't as relevant as it is now. With AI being relevant, I can't imagine trying to do a transition and trying to figure out AI vulnerabilities and all of that stuff and keep patching. Like that would drive me absolutely nuts. So I would say also start from a clean slate. Like there's too many people, I think, that want to can think about migration, and that is, I won't say that's the wrong way because that's the way we always used to think of it, right? Joe mentioned Vista, right? Share, it's calling out his age, and I'm just as old too. So you start thinking about all of those things, right? And you knee jerk to, oh, well, I need to migrate because that's what we used to do. But you should do something new, like you should be starting fresh because all of those policies, you don't need them anymore. I'm echoing my peer Rob York, but you don't need all that stuff anymore. Like you probably got group policies out there or even apps out there deployed from, God, when I was in high school or like 10 years. So why are we bringing all that stuff? Because
Wait, you were in high school 10 years
You
ago?
are not.
I tried to bring it up, right? 99 is when I graduated. I'm an old man. So like, you shouldn't even be doing that stuff anymore because you're like, why are you dragging all of that old stuff into the new stuff? Because essentially what it's going to do is just cause you headaches. You're going to get either false alarms or false messages, and then now you got to go chase ghosts, which you should really be trying to figure out what your real gaps are. So the whole preferences thing and is there gaps probably will be for you, or if depending on your workflow. But if you might have a workflow that doesn't have any gaps, so you got to do the work to figure out what your process is and what your prescription is to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, it's a good point that you mentioned on the migrating. So we have a group policy analyzing tool, right, in Intune where you can import the group policies and it says, oh, 40% of your group policies are actually available as CSPs in Intune. And so you stop right there and you're like, well, I can't move up to Intune. But, as we're talking about now, because 60% of them are irrelevant today. And you don't really need all of those group policy settings anymore. So as opposed to migrating the group policies, creating the CSPs from the group policies, work with your security teams, work with your network teams, and say, what policies do we need to set up Windows 11? And start that way. See which ones are available. Sure, you can look to see which ones are available in Intune, but there's probably other ones available that you can use as well. So take a look at your what is available in the settings catalog, and then just start setting those policies. Work with the other teams, your network, your security, your Active Directory teams, even to see, as I mentioned before, okay, so if they're not doing map network drives, how are they accessing those file shares? Well, work with some of those other teams to see, what kind of policies can we create in Intune, and then create those from scratch as opposed to a migration.
So just I'm going to pile on to the policy analytics piece. I wouldn't start there. I would start with settings catalog. Settings catalog is probably your best start. If you start using group policy analytics, I'm going to echo my IT pro hat. You're going to see all types of stuff and you're going to go away. Like you're going to see stuff and you're like, this isn't there, that isn't there. First thing you're going to do, you're going to block yourself mentally. Just start with settings catalog. Start with settings catalog. Start with a blank slate. If you need to set background for people or a customized start menu, settings catalog should be start. That's where your starting point should be.
I think just to pile on, right? There is a sense that a migration is easier than a fresh deployment. And I think I want to disabuse that notion. You should approach a migration the same way you would approach a fresh deployment. Start with the basics. What do you need? Why do you need it? And what is the goal you want to accomplish? Because then what you're migrating over has a target. Otherwise, I think, as both Joe and Danny have said, if you just try and take what is to what can be done, you are kind of chasing a moving target, and you may never get to a point where you feel, okay, it is how I like it to be. So I'd say get to the North Star that you want for your org first, regardless of which platform you're migrating. Don't assume that the migration one-to-one is always the right way to go, because things have evolved in the time between the solutions we released in the past and what we're releasing now. So just kind of keep that going and start there and then drive your migration the same way you would a brand new deployment.
Yeah, I would say if there's one AMA we don't talk about GPO, then it's not a complete one, right? So thank you for sharing the tooling, the mindset, the mind share, and this is a very complete discussion, I would say. Let's move on to the next. So this one is about authentication. The question is, if we go cloud native, how do users still have access to file share, legacy apps, payroll, HR system, or other resources that still expect on-prem authentication?
Danny, I've been talking a lot first. I'll let you go first, and then I'll pile on to you.
That one's interesting. I can tell you the way I would approach it is, how do I get those things to be shareable via the cloud? Like, I'm trying to articulate it correctly without being overzealous. Like, those file shares, like why can't they be in cloud shares? Like, because that would be your simpler method. I think that requires some tooling. Joe can correct me if I'm wrong. There may be some tooling.
SharePoint. Some of those could be moved right over to SharePoint.
Yeah.
Assuming you're using SharePoint, right? Well, that's why we have SharePoint and Teams and these productivity and sharing tools for those file shares, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, if it was me, again, I'm trying to not channel PM Danny and do that version, but more realistic to the customers, like, because I've been there for so long. So those things have to be moved to the cloud somehow, some way, some type of process, because I don't want to continue to rely on my on-prem infrastructure, right? Even today, as the world's changed, my past experience, everything needed to be on-prem. Now with everything being into the cloud, right? Because they want to access everything from everywhere. But the challenge that we as IT Pro have is making sure that access is secure and reliable. So putting it in some type of cloud storage, whether it be SharePoint or some other Microsoft solution like Teams or whatever that uses SharePoint in the backend anyway. So like having those things accessible that way. Now, can you do file sharing on-prem? I'm sure there's something I'm not aware of related to Azure AD or Entra Connect or something like that where authentication could pass through. Joe may know about that, but I'm just telling you, like, point blank for me, my strategy in North Star will be moving those things to some type of cloud storage so that people can access that from anywhere, anytime. And then that sets my future North Star goal of alleviating my environment, my organization from having on-prem reliability.
When you talk about like some of those older apps, I know payroll and HR systems, they were just examples, but those are so important to be secure that you probably want to upgrade to a newer version if you have one that's still requiring Kerberos or on-prem authentication. Again, I know those were just examples, but I'm going to use those examples because those are the ones that you mentioned. Some of those payroll and HR systems or some of the other legacy apps, and I will use the term legacy loosely to say any app that's more than 20 years old. Some of those legacy apps that you're using, we do have Cloud Kerberos. I think it's generally available, Cloud Kerberos, but you can use Cloud Kerberos to access some of those older systems as well.
Sounds good. Thank you for all the examples. There's a related question though from LinkedIn. It says, it seems like the printing and shared mapping is still a key problem moving to cloud only from one on-prem. Why is third-party scripting still the solution?
As opposed to? So printing, third-party scripting doesn't have to be the solution. Microsoft has Universal Print and other, if you're using some of the other printer OEMs, they have their own type of universal print product as well, cloud printing. So for printing, it doesn't have to be. You can easily move to an Intune managed Entra auth device that doesn't need to have mapped printers or manual printer drivers. You can use some sort of a cloud printing like Universal Print. For the key mapping, again, we don't think about needing to access the Q drive when you are on a cloud native device, because your OneDrive will automatically sync things like your desktop, your documents, your pictures into OneDrive. So you don't need that to be mapped as the letter U or the letter Q anymore, or the letter X. Those are just automatically mapped to those cloud shares. You double click a file in your documents folder, and unbeknownst to you, you're actually looking at it on OneDrive up in the cloud. It's not actually stored locally. There might be a crumb stored locally, but it's actually stored in OneDrive. Other files, again, we just talked about SharePoint, and Danny was mentioning other cloud shares. So it's not that we don't want to give you a solution. Again, printing, we have universal print for accessing the shared drives. We don't have a way to map drives within Intune because we think map drives aren't necessary where you can do other things like host them on a cloud share.
Thank you, Joe. I'll move on to the next question. It says this is setup AMA. So this audience specifically want to ask a question about BYOD mobile devices. We are migrating to Intune from a third-party solution. What is the difference between MDM, MAM, and MAM without enrollment?
I can
let Priya take
That's
this.
right in Priya's spot.
First, let me say we're so happy you're migrating and welcome to Intune. Kind of top down, I think. So MDM is basically mobile device management. MAM is mobile application management. And I think the difference between the two is where the policy sits. You would do device management if you would want to control the device. So your users have to actually enroll the device. You push device level policy. Application management, like its name, sits at the application layer. So you could control what a user could do when in their corporate profile within an application, but that particular policy will not touch anything on the device. And MAM without enrollment is exactly what it says. So Intune gives you the ability to do application level management without having to manage the device. Now, what does it mean for you? I think it goes back to some of the discussions we had earlier. What is the goal of that your organization is looking to achieve in allowing BYOD devices? There is no right or wrong, and different organizations, based on how you want to do, will go, we don't want to know about the device, so we are only going to control the corporate data that you touch. And that's where MAM without enrollment, or MAM-WE, as it's internally referred to, becomes your solution of choice. That means you say all the apps get deployed with a application management policy. And if that application, if the device or whatever compliance it validates that your device fails, the only thing that will happen is the corporate data is wiped. Nothing else is touched. MDM kind of takes it one step further. You can force a PIN, you can force configurations on the device, depending on whether it's a Apple mobile device or an Android mobile device. Kind of your options are different. On the Apple side, it's more the whole device. On the Android side, BYOD gives you a work profile. So there's a separation between personal and corporate. And application protection, or MAM, can be added on. So it's not an either or. MAM is something that you can add as a defense in depth, even if you do device protection. So think of these as tools in a toolkit that you can then evaluate to figure out against your requirements and then move over. The one thing I will say, similar to moving from on-prem to cloud native, these will require an unenroll, re-enroll for BYOD. So there is end user action that is going to be required. It's not going to be seamless. And that should be part of what you consider when you plan your move to.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned one thing you mentioned, Priya, was that it's not one or the other, right? It's not should I do MDM or should I do MAM? You can do both. And most of our, and I don't have access to telemetry, but I think most of our customers are doing both. So
Absolutely.
my device is enrolled. So Microsoft, as an example, is it's my own device, it's BYOD, but my device is enrolled. So Microsoft is managing it, but also I can't take a screenshot of Teams, right? So we have these MAM policies on these devices. So it's not one or the other. The only thing that's kind of by itself would be MAM-WE, MAM without enrollment, because you can't do MDM on an unenrolled device or non-enrolled device. So that's kind of by itself, but MDM and MAM, you can absolutely do those together. One can be piled onto the other, for sure.
Yeah, I have definitely seen a lot of trends of customer adopting BYOD policies these days, and so it's a very hot topic right now. So while Priya is here, fire your questions over, and with all these groups here, you'll get great answers. I just wanted to move quickly to the next question. Obviously, group policy discussion is not done yet. So this question is about group policy. Is group policy still something that has a plan to merge and move to cloud native?
I mean, it kind of has, not group policy itself, but setting policies on the device. That's what settings catalog does. So I'm not really sure. Like as Danny was saying, can you migrate your group policies from on-premises into the cloud? You can. And as I said right before, Danny had mentioned that, you'll probably notice that 100% of your policies from group policy are not available in the cloud, and that might scare you away. So it's not that group policy is something that has a plan to merge and move to cloud native. We have settings catalog, and that's where you should start instead of starting with group policy or even thinking about merging group policy into a cloud native device. You should not simply, because it's not simple, but start looking at the company settings catalog so you can start setting those policies there.
For all these questions about policy, the thing that's coming up for me in my head is what policies are they talking about? Like, it would be nice to know exactly what policies. So any follow-ups that people want to share in the chat, any policies that you think you rely on heavily in the chat, like post them in the chat. I'd love to see what policies are coming to mind when y'all ask about policy, because there's a million policies, but what exactly are you asking about? So anyway, that's it. That's all I have.
Yeah, I think it's probably better for us to follow up on the specific policy questions in the chat. And just so you guys know, we'll keep the chat live until the end of the week. So ask away if you don't feel like your questions answered through the discussion. I'll move on to the
before we move on, Danny, you have a show unpacking endpoint management, right? And so I think you had some guests recently that you talked about group policy.
Yeah, I would.
aka.ms/ it's on the screen. aka.ms/UEM/policy for more information on that as well.
Yeah, we talked a lot about policy with Rob York and Dano. So I would say go check out that video. It's really informative. Should definitely go check it out.
Sounds good. Definitely leverage that AMA as well. That one is a very deep dive. I watched it personally, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Moving on to the next. This question is from LinkedIn. Is it a good idea to use MDT or not?
Danny, since you have a Rob York hat and Rob York isn't here, I will let you stand up and shout the answer to this question.
I'm actually no. Don't use MDT. Like you should be moving on from MDT. You should be using all of our modern provisioning technologies. You should be using Autopilot and provisioning your devices that way.
Not to mention, MDT is actually no longer, it has never supported Windows 11. So Windows 11 now is 5 years old. MDT doesn't support Windows 11. Windows 10's out of support. So our honest answer is MDT is no longer supported on current Windows operating system. So we can't say that it's a good idea to use MDT anyway, but no, it's not.
Yeah, look, I'm not one to shy away from accountability. I deprecated MDT last year. So it's not something people should be using now or in the future. Like it's I'm not going to say it's not a good tool. It should not be a part of your future North Star strategy. Let me say it that way.
Anything to add, Priya?
Nope,
All
nothing
good?
on this one.
Cool. I'm going to move on to tech community question next. This one is a specific question with a large device estate. How do we migrate 10,000 devices from a hybrid environment, AD plus Entra to cloud native? Move them into Autopilot plus wipe, or are there less destructive paths?
I think we kind of like the answer to that
do.
has been talked about throughout the session so far over the last, I don't know, 35 minutes. One thing, it does require a wipe and a reload, whether you do that through an autopilot wipe, so register all the devices into autopilot and send the autopilot reset to those devices. That is absolutely one way to do it. But the way we would actually recommend doing it is keeping your existing devices as hybrid if they have to stay hybrid. But when devices are being refreshed, when devices are being reset anyway, when devices are being sent to a different user, when devices are being reprovisioned because a help desk took too long, whatever the reason is that you would typically go to your configuration manager and reimage a device, instead of reimaging the device, yes, put it through autopilot. I know it seems destructive to force a wipe and a reload. There's just too many policies that come from group policy, too many policies that come from configuration manager that might have static registry entries that may not ever go anywhere. As the reason why we actually need you to do that wipe and reload. So your existing devices, there's really no need to do that wipe and reload. It's the new devices that should be directly done through autopilot into Entra, into Intune, cloud native managed. All your existing devices, as they're being repurposed or reset anyway, that's when you should think about doing those. Danny?
Yeah, I like to be a little bit more prescriptive.
Well, we only have 25 more minutes. So
I know, right?
I had to give the Reader's Digest version of my
yeah, you should definitely, definitely don't just hit wipe on all 10,000 devices. I don't think anybody would do that, not on purpose at least. But like, you should have some type of process, standard order operation. So your normal refresh cycle is when you should do it, right? So if you're refreshing 10, 20, whatever, then yeah, go ahead and get those. But like it's kind of like Joe said, we've been talking about it the whole time. You're going to have to identify what your transition looks like or your new workflow looks like. So policies, apps, like, is all it already being delivered from the cloud, right? We talked earlier about somebody that had all their workloads moved over. So all your workloads moved over. If you're using configuration manager, are you delivering apps? Have you taken care of the shares, the printing, all the tools that have access to certain things? So there's a little bit more, there's a little bit more investigation you'll need to do, maybe even by department, right? So HR is going to be different than sales. Sales is going to be different than IT. IT is going to be different than whatever, all your different departments. They'll all have different workflows. So some type of strategic, thought out plan should be thought about.
And I think part of that will include, I've mentioned before, like OneDrive, because you want to make sure that those documents, those pictures, anything that's stored on the desktop, because I know a lot of people that use their desktop as a storage folder, that gets stored somewhere. So that actually makes the whole process less destructive, as the question was worded, because it's being stored in the cloud and then being restored back down to the new device simply by logging in, and your desktop syncs back down.
Right. That's all part of that preparation, right? Because look, I remember doing this early on with customers. Like there's going to be this person that has something on C, their name, right? Or C temp. And then they transition and like, oh, I don't have this. Well, like you're going to have to set up some processes and SOPs for your organization to make sure people follow. Then you're going to have to monitor those processes. So I won't say it's a slow roll, but it's like you have to be on top of what your targets are and your processes. So
I'm glad you guys asked this question because we have another AMA lined up right after this. So if you didn't have enough of us, please tune in, aka.ms/deployment made easy. It's right after this show, so you will jump right in, and please don't hesitate to ask again in that question, in that session. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. Now we have a question from X. Why is Company Portal app required for Intune management?
Sure, I can start with that one.
Yes, let's go.
I think so technical, the answer would probably differ platform to platform, but effectively there is a management app required on device to be able to receive policy, execute policy, and enforce policy. That's probably the simplest way. The actual thing that the Company Portal app or depending on which flavor or platform. There are different names. What exactly it does will vary platform to platform, but fundamentally, this is the Intune client-side component that helps deliver the solution that you had envisioned for your devices. Joe, anything else?
Yeah,
Danny,
I'd
anything else to
say,
add?
yeah, and Priya, you're an expert on some of the mobile devices, but I'd say even on something like Android, I think Authenticator could be that app instead of Company Portal, I think. And I think in iOS, ADE can do a lot of the enrollment stuff without the company portal. I think it's a good idea to have company portal, absolutely, because that's where you'll get your for Windows, you can see if it's BitLocked, you can see what apps are available as assigned apps, and for Mac OS, what assigned apps. So I think it's great to have the company portal. But as Priya said, I think it's on a OS by OS basis on whether it's a requirement. Priya, I interrupted. You're about to.
No, not at all. So I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there's a common question of, hey, why do I have so many apps that come down? And why can't they all be done together? They could, but then the footprint of a single app and the impact of a single app now becomes bigger. So Authenticator does one thing very well. And if we kind of doubled it up, now the impact of that app will change. So I think Authenticator is the app that is required to do authentication. And all the authentication, especially in the modern platforms, will go through Authenticator. But I think Company Portal performs a complementary role, especially for mobile platforms, that does the Intune enrollment and management and works with Authenticator or Defender to make sure that the Microsoft stack is one solid stack. So hopefully you don't see the different pieces working together except when you're prompting your users. But that's kind of why there are so many different apps on your devices, and they are actually working together under the covers to deliver the end-to-end solution.
You had mentioned earlier that Company Portal kind of acts like that Intune client-side extension. We have Intune management extensions. We have MMPC. And I know somebody's going to put in there, what about it? IME? What about MMPC? Yes, those are also complementary services that also do other things for the Intune clients. So we don't want to get into all of that stuff right now.
From an end user perspective, I find it's very easy to explain to people what Intune is. It was like, remember you have this company portal on your phone? Then people, oh, you work on Intune. So just contribute a perspective, not very practical.
That's the exact reason, Charis, why it's required, so that we can tell the end user. We can see if they're Intune managed or not. That's
we help you manage your devices. You didn't see us, it's on your phone. All right, jokes aside, I'm going to move on to the next question. It's a very tactical GPO question, so I will read it out to everybody. We're migrating GPOs to Intune and found about 25 settings marked as deprecated. However, some of these settings are still required by my organization. Could you please advise on the recommended approach? Should we migrate these using an alternative Intune policy, settings catalog, CSP, scripts, or leave them unmanaged until leave them unmanaged if they are deprecated?
That's a tough question to answer without knowing your very specific scenario and which settings those are that are deprecated. As I mentioned before, if one of those required settings is to turn off active desktop or turn off AeroGlass, then they're necessary because your security team doesn't want active desktop or AeroGlass on these devices, but they're unnecessary. They're deprecated because those don't exist on Windows 11. So without knowing the exact settings, it's hard to say, but for sure, start with settings catalog, and every setting that you can set through settings catalog. After that, see if there's a complementary setting. See if there's something equivalent. And if there's not an actual settings catalog setting, there's probably a OMA URI, OMA-URI setting that you could use for that. And if there's not, then it's actually something that Windows 11 doesn't have an MDM policy for. If there's no settings catalog, there's no OMA URI, then probably Windows 11 itself can't be managed for that setting. So it's tough to say, yes, you should do this. No, you should do this. You shouldn't do this, because we don't know your specific scenario. But you're right. You should start with settings catalog, manage what you can through Settings Catalog, then go to OMA URI, manage what you can't through Settings Catalog, manage the OMA URI, the custom CSPs, and then after that, it will depend on what that gap is. Danny?
You nailed it, Joe. Good job.
Yeah, and also I wanted to emphasize that you can also type specific questions in the chat of the community, so we can follow up throughout end of the week. So use that. I will move on to the next question. What are the most common mistakes any organization or IT admin make when moving from on-prem device management, SCCM GPO, to Intune, hybrid join, cloud only, etc.?
I'll go first.
Yep, you can go. Yep.
Most common mistake, I'm going to give two. Stalling, losing momentum.
That was my most common mistake, not starting. Yep, go ahead.
Like I see this every day now, investigating telemetry and understanding how customers are using. So the stall, I think, is real. One of the things I'll double down on is once I see customers co-manage, operationalize, quote unquote, the bridge, as we used to call it, the co-management bridge, they lose momentum because they operationalize the bridge. They figured out how they change their workflows or operational procedures so that they can function. A new project comes up and now all of a sudden you got bandwidth, and then 2-3 months later, a year later, you're still hybrid joining devices, or you're still doing these old flows, and now you're trying to figure out, I need to get to cloud native because the next thing I got to deal with or worry about or plan for is AI. So the stall, I think, is real. Customers, they just tend to not finish the last mile. And then the second one I would say is continuing the hybrid join devices. I think that one's real because it has a longer term effect and a longer term debt that you don't see immediately in front of you. You'll pay that tax later when there's enough security things that pop up that say, hey guys, we just need to go cloud native. And then now you're looking at 50,000 devices that are hybrid joined or more, and trying to figure out, like the other question we had in chat is, oh crap, how do I get these devices? Wait, I gotta wipe them? Yeah, wait, whoa, what? So it's a debt you pay later. You just don't see it in front of you until the time comes when somebody says, hey, we need to go ahead and finish that transition to cloud native. So those are my two.
Yeah, I'd say one more that I want to talk about. I know we only have a couple of minutes left, and we have a whole AMA in a few minutes on autopilot. But I see customers that do autopilot pre-provisioning for 100% of their estate, and they do that for a couple of years, and then later on they say, why have I been doing pre-provisioning for 10,000 devices when I really only need to pre-provision those specialty devices? My end users can actually click a couple of keys and get to their desktop and let the apps come down. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see is 100% pre-provisioning instead of just those specialty devices. Let the end user do the autopilot user-driven flow. And again, we have a whole autopilot AMA coming up soon. I'm actually going to be in that one as well. So if you want to yell at me and you want to ask more questions about that, I'll be on that one as well. So you can yell at me then.
Lucky you, Joe, you get to attend another AMA. I'm having a lot of fun here, but here is our last question. Okay, here is our last question of the day. How does a device know that it needs to be onboarded to Intune? Let's put it away.
Yeah, go ahead, Priya.
I'll take a pass. So, I think the path, there are a few paths, right? One, generally, IT will send out instructions. So most organizations let their end users know the requirements for being able to access corporate resources from any device. If there's a corporate device like your laptops generally are, those come with, hey, open it up, and if you click this, it's going to start through that. I think the other one for personal devices that generally triggers this is conditional access. Organizations say, hey, you're trying to log in with a corporate credential. We're doing a quick check, and does it meet the requirements or does it not? And then the flow itself will guide the user to do what they have to do. So I think there are a variety of ways. Either they stumble upon it because they're trying to get Teams on their phone and they are told, hey, they need to enroll it, or they're following instructions that IT has posted on the internal websites. Discovery would depend on what the organization has, but I'd say conditional access is probably your friend in driving some of these.
Yep. Conditional access. You mentioned with Teams. I was thinking when they go to launch Outlook or one of the Microsoft 365 apps, it's going to say your device needs to be managed to access this app. And again, that goes back to your conditional access as well. So I think the device itself might not know. It's the policy that it's receiving because of some sort of a user action. The user logs in, the user double clicks a file or tries to download and then launch an app, something like that.
Yeah, I feel like it could be a really elaborate session just about that. So about identity. So maybe you develop future ideas for future AMAs. But that said, it is our last question. And for those who really enjoyed this, please tune on to the next, which is aka.ms/TCL/Intune. It gives you the direction to all the rest of the AMAs throughout the day. And thank you so much for our speakers here. And we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.